The autumn air was crisp, carrying the familiar smell of dry leaves and diesel exhaust from the busy street next to the massive brick building. This was Central High, one of the biggest schools in the city. A sprawling maze of hallways and lockers that felt more like a factory than a place of learning. It was just past 7:30 in the morning, and the energy outside was frantic. Students were rushing through the double doors, anxious to get to their homerooms before the first bell rang. There was the usual noise of teenagers shouting, laughing, and complaining about homework. But underneath it all, there was a current of stress. Midterms were coming up, and for the seniors especially, every minute counted. Among the sea of moving bodies was a young woman named Tiana. She was 17 years old. Tall and slender, carrying herself with a quiet confidence that usually kept her out of trouble. Today, however, she was running late. She had overslept by 20 minutes, a rare mistake for her, and now she was paying the price. She adjusted the strap of her heavy backpack, which was slung over one shoulder, and clutched a large black art portfolio to her chest. It was a project she had spent weeks working on, a series of charcoal drawings that she was incredibly proud of, but right now, it was just a heavy burden making her walk slower. Tiana weaved through the crowd, muttering, "Excuse me," as she dodged a group of freshmen blocking the sidewalk. She could see the main entrance just ahead. The concrete steps were wide and grand, usually filled with kids sitting around, but this late in the morning, they were clear. She just had to make it up those stairs and down the hall to her locker. She took a deep breath, preparing to jog the last 50 feet. When a sudden noise made her stop, it was the sound of a siren, short and sharp, cutting through the morning chatter. It wasn't a full wail, just a quick whoop meant to grab attention. A black and white patrol car, its engine idling loudly, rolled slowly up to the curb right in front of the school. It moved with that deliberate, heavy pace that police cars have when they are hunting for something. The car blocked the bike lane, forcing a couple of kids on bikes to swerve onto the sidewalk to avoid hitting it. Tiana paused on the edge of the sidewalk, just watching the car. A hush fell over the group of students nearest to the curb. It wasn't unusual to see police at the school. They often directed traffic in the mornings. But this car wasn't directing traffic. It was parked diagonally, taking up space, and the lights mounted on top were flashing a silent pattern of blue and red. The driver's door opened and a heavy boot hit the pavement. Officer Davidson stepped out. He adjusted his utility belt, shifting the weight of the baton and pepper spray that hung from his hips. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, wearing the dark uniform that seemed to absorb the sunlight. He had a mustache that twitched slightly as he looked over the crowd of students, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. He didn't look like a friendly traffic cop. He looked like a man who was looking for a reason to use his authority to Officer Davidson. This wasn't a scene of children going to learn. To him, this was a chaotic crowd that needed to be controlled. He scanned the faces, looking for anything that didn't fit his idea of order. He saw kids with hoodies up, kids laughing too loud, and kids walking too fast. His gaze drifted past the kids standing near the bus stop and landed on Tiana. She was standing alone, separated from the main group by a few yards. She was checking her phone, frowning at the time, and then she shifted the art portfolio under her arm. She was wearing a dark hoodie and jeans, simple clothes, but to Davidson she stood out. Maybe it was because she was in a hurry. Maybe it was because she was alone. Or maybe it was just the bias that lived in the back of his mind. The one that told him that a black kid in a hoodie, even in front of a prestigious school, was worth a second look. Davidson reached back into his car and turned off the engine, but he left the lights flashing. The swirling colors reflected off the windows of the school. He slammed the door shut with a heavy thud that made Tiana look up. She saw him looking at her, and for a split second, she thought he was just going to tell her to get on the sidewalk properly. She took a step forward, intending to walk past him and up the stairs. "Hold it right there," Davidson called out. His voice was deep and raspy, the kind of voice that carried without shouting. Tiana stopped. She looked around, thinking he might be talking to someone behind her, but there was no one there. She turned back to him, confused. "Me?" she asked, pointing a finger to her chest. "Yeah, you," Davidson said. He took a few steps toward her, placing himself squarely in her path. "Where do you think you're going in such a hurry?" I'm going to school, Tiana said. Her voice was steady, but she felt a knot of nervousness tighten in her stomach. She checked the time again. I'm late for class. Davidson didn't move. He looked her up and down, his eyes lingering on the backpack and the large black portfolio case she was hugging. School doesn't start for another 10 minutes, he said, though he was wrong. The first bell rang in 3, and you're walking like you're running from something. I'm just walking fast because I'm late, Tiana repeated. She tried to step around him to her right. Excuse me, officer, I really have to go. Didn't I say hold it? Davidson snapped. He shifted his weight, blocking her again. He took off his sunglasses, revealing eyes that were narrow and suspicious. You fit the description we got a call about this morning? Tiana felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks. A few students nearby had stopped to watch. A whisper began to ripple through the crowd. Description, she asked, her voice rising a little in pitch. Of who? Doesn't matter, Davidson said dismissively. He gestured toward her bag. We had a report of a student in the area acting suspicious. He's possibly involved in a theft near the convenience store a few blocks back. Dark hoodie, similar build. It was a vague description, one that could fit dozens of kids in this neighborhood. It was a catch-all phrase he used when he wanted to stop someone. I need to see what's in that bag. Tiana stared at him in disbelief. This is my school bag, she said, clutching the strap tighter. I have homework. I'm not involved in any theft. I'm just a student. Turn it around and open it, Davidson commanded. He wasn't asking. He was ordering. He rested his hand on his belt, right next to his radio, a subtle reminder of the power he held. The crowd grew larger. Students who were walking up the steps paused to see what was happening. Phones began to come out of pockets. In this day and age, everyone knew that when a police officer stopped someone, you needed to record it. Tiana saw the cameras pointing at her. She felt humiliated. She wasn't a student, a member of the debate club, and the daughter of a woman who worked hard every day. She had never stolen anything in her life. And now, here she was, being treated like a criminal on the front steps of her own high school. Officer, please, Tiana said, trying to keep her voice from shaking. I'm going to be late. My teacher is strict. If I'm late again, I get detention. You should have thought about that before you came out here looking suspicious, Davidson replied. He took another step closer, invading her personal space. The smell of stale coffee and peppermint from his breath washed over her. Let's go. Dump it out. Or I can take you down to the station, and we can sort it out there. Your choice. The threat hung in the air. Tiana knew that sorting it out at the station meant missing the whole day of school, calling her mother in a world of trouble she didn't deserve. But opening her bag right here, spilling her private life onto the dirty sidewalk in front of everyone, felt like a violation too. She looked at the school entrance longingly. The safety of the classrooms was so close, just a few yards away, but this wall of blue uniform was blocking it. Davidson's patience was wearing thin. He didn't like being questioned, especially not by a teenager. He saw her hesitation not as an attempt to protect her dignity, but as an act of defiance. To him, she wasn't a person. She was a problem that needed to be solved. I'm not going to ask you again, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. He reached out and grabbed the strap of her backpack, jerking it slightly. Open the bag. Tiana's heart pounded against her ribs. The morning wasn't supposed to go like this. She was just supposed to go to art class. But as she looked into the hard, unyielding face of the officer, she realized that her day, and possibly her life, was about to take a turn she never expected. She stood frozen on the sidewalk, trapped between the expectations of her school and the authority of the law. Wondering how a simple walk to class had turned into a standoff, the grip on the strap of her backpack was tight and unrelenting. Tiana stumbled forward a step, caught off balance by the sudden jerk. The heavy weight of the bag pulled at her shoulder. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the wave of embarrassment that crashed over her. Around them, the noise of the morning rush had died down significantly. The laughter and shouting were replaced by a low, tense murmur. Dozens of eyes were fixed on her, people she knew from biology class, kids she shared lunch with, and faces she didn't recognize at all were all watching the scene unfold. "You're hurting my arm," Tiana said, her voice trembling slightly. She tried to pull back, but the officer held the strap firm. "Then cooperate," Officer Davidson barked. He didn't let go. Instead, he used the leverage to pull her closer to the side of his patrol car, away from the flow of foot traffic. "I told you to open the bag. Why is that so hard if you have nothing to hide?" Tiana felt a hot lump form in her throat. She knew how this looked. She knew that even if she was innocent, the act of resisting, even just pulling awake, could be twisted into something else. With shaking hands, she reached for the zipper. The sound of the teeth sliding open seemed deafeningly loud in the sudden quiet. She didn't want to do this. She didn't want to dump her books and her life out on the dirty concrete for everyone to see. But she didn't feel like she had a choice. She took the bag off her shoulder and held it over the hood of the police car. With a sigh that felt like she was letting go of her dignity, she turned it upside down. Thud. Thud. Splash. Her textbooks hit the metal hood of the car with a heavy sound. A binder filled with notes slid out and landed open, pages fluttering in the breeze. But the worst part was the pencil case. It wasn't zipped all the way. As the bag tipped, a collection of colored pencils, pens, and an eraser tumbled out. A bottle of water she had packed for lunch had cracked open slightly, leaking a small puddle onto the binder in the car's paint. "Is this it?" Davidson asked, looking at the mess of school supplies. He picked up a math book, flipping the cover as if checking for hidden compartments, then tossed it back onto the hood carelessly. "Where's the rest of it?" "That's everything," Tiana said, her voice rising in frustration. She reached for her sketchbook, which had fallen near the wiper blades, but Davidson swatted her hand away. "Don't touch the evidence," he snapped. He pointed to the large black portfolio case she was still clutching against her chest with her other arm. "What's in that?" "That looks big enough to hold stolen goods." Tiana hugged the portfolio tighter. "This is my art project. It's for my final grade. You can't open that. You'll ruin the paper." Davidson let out a short, sarcastic laugh. "Oh, now it's an art project. First you're late for class. Now you're an artist." He stepped closer, invading her personal space again. He seemed to enjoy the fear in her eyes. It gave him a sense of control. "Open it," Tiana said. The word came out before she could stop herself. She was terrified, but this was her work. This was months of charcoal shading and careful line work. If he ripped it, or if the wind caught it, it would be destroyed. "Please, just look through the bag. There's nothing else. Don't touch the art." The smile vanished from Davidson's face. He didn't like being told no, especially not by a teenager. In his mind, obedience was mandatory, and any refusal was an admission of guilt. The muscles in his jaw tightened, and his posture shifted from relaxed intimidation to active aggression. "I gave you a lawful order," he shouted, making the younger students near the steps flinch. "You are interfering with a police investigation. Put the case on the hood." "I didn't do anything," Tiana cried out. Tears were starting to well up, blurring her vision. She looked around at the crowd, desperate for a teacher, for a principal, for anyone to step in. "Someone help me. He's harassing me." A few boys in the crowd stepped forward, anger flashing in their eyes. "Yo, leave her alone, man," one of them shouted. "She goes here." "She's in my history class." Davidson ignored them. He was used to noise. He reached out and grabbed Tiana by the wrist, the one holding the portfolio. His grip was like iron. He twisted her arm, forcing her to bend over to relieve the pressure. "Act, go," Tiana screamed. The pain shot up her arm, sharp and hot. "You're hurting me." "Stop resisting," Davidson yelled back. It was a script he knew well. If he accused her of resisting, it justified whatever force he decided to use. He used his other hand to grab the portfolio case, prying her fingers loose. The crowd erupted. "Stop, stop." Students chanted. The phones were held higher now, capturing every angle. The video would be blurry and shaky, but the audio would be clear. The sound of a girl screaming in pain while a man in a uniform shouted orders. Davidson finally pried the portfolio from her grip. He tossed it onto the hood of the car next to the spilled books. He didn't care about the art. He just wanted to prove a point. He flipped the latches open. "See?" he said, roughly pulling the cover back. "What is this trash?" He pulled out the large sheets of paper. They were charcoal drawings. One was a portrait of an old man with deep wrinkles in his face. Another was a sketch of the city skyline. They were beautiful, detailed, and fragile, but Davidson treated them like garbage. He held one up to the light, squinting at it as if it were a secret code. "Is this drugs?" he asked, pointing to a dark shaded area on the paper. "What is this smudge?" "It's charcoal," Tiana yelled, wiping tears from her face with her free hand. She didn't care about her arm anymore. She cared about her art. "Put it down. You're going to ruin it." Davidson crumpled the edge of the paper slightly, just to see her reaction. Tiana let out a sob. It was a sound of pure defeat. She stood there on the sidewalk, her book spilled, her water leaking. Her masterpiece in the hands of a man who saw her as nothing more than a suspect. "You think you're smart?" Davidson asked, throwing the drawing back onto the pile. He leaned in close to her face, his nose inches from hers. "You think because you go to this big school you're better than me? You think you don't have to listen to the law?" "I never said that," Tiana whispered. She was exhausted. The fight was draining out of her, replaced by a heavy feeling of sadness. "I just wanted to go to school." "You're under arrest," Davidson said suddenly. The words hung in the air, shocking the crowd into silence. "You're resisting arrest and interfering with an investigation. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." "What?" Tiana's eyes went wide. "Arrest? For what? I didn't steal anything. You want to keep acting tough? Let's see how tough you are in a holding cell," Davidson said. He spun her around forcefully. He kicked her feet apart, forcing her into a wide stance. He grabbed her wrists and pulled them behind her back. The metal of his handcuffs clinked against his belt. The reality of the situation hit Tiana like a physical blow. She was going to jail. She was going to be taken away in front of everyone, for nothing. Her mother would find out. Her teachers would find out. Her reputation, the one she worked so hard to build as a good student, would be destroyed. She hung her head, the tears falling onto the pavement below. Davidson grabbed the handcuffs. He was enjoying this moment. He felt powerful. He had taken this disrespectful kid and put her in her place. He didn't care about the theft call anymore. He was making a point about authority. He tightened his grip on her wrists, ready to snap the cuffs on, completely unaware that his life and his career were about to change in the next 30 seconds. Behind him, the traffic on the street began to slow down. A sleek black SUV with tinted windows was approaching the curb, its driver looking for a place to park. It was a car that commanded respect, a car that belonged to the city. But Davidson was too focused on the girl in front of him to hear the tires crunching on the asphalt behind him. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into Tiana's wrists, but the sting was sharp and quick. Before Officer Davidson could click the lock shut, he stopped. He wasn't hesitating out of mercy, and he certainly wasn't rethinking his decision. He was pausing because the crowd was getting too loud. The chanting had started again, louder this time, and he could see a few teachers running down the front steps of the school. He didn't want witnesses if he could avoid them, but more than that, he didn't want to lose control of the narrative. He jerked Tiana's arms up higher, forcing her to bend forward at the waist to relieve the pressure on her shoulders. It was a painful, submissive pose, designed to make her look small and guilty. "Stop resisting," he yelled again, mostly for the benefit of the people recording on their phones. "Just calm down and this will be over." "I am calm," Tiana cried out, her voice strained. "You're the one hurting me. Let me go." "You want to play games?" Davidson growled into her ear. "We can play games all day. I've got all the time in the world. You, however, are going to miss your classes." He took one hand off her wrist and used it to shove her forward toward the hood of his car, right next to her spilled drawings. He wanted her to look at the mess he had made. He wanted her to see her charcoal sketch of the old man crumpled and dirty under her leaking water bottle. It was a psychological tactic, meant to break her spirit before he even put her in the back of the car. Tiana looked at the drawing. A smudge of black charcoal was smeared across the old man's face now, ruining the shading she had worked on for 3 days. It broke her heart more than the handcuffs did. That drawing was supposed to be a gift for her grandmother. Now it was trash. Look at that, Davidson said, shoving her head down slightly. That's what happens when you don't listen. You mess up your own life. I didn't mess it up. You did. Tiana screamed. She couldn't hold it in anymore. The fear was turning into anger. You're a bully. You're just a bully with a badge. The words hit a nerve. Davidson's face turned a shade darker. He grabbed her by the back of her hoodie and yanked her back up. Watch your mouth, he hissed. You think you're tough? You think you can talk to me like that on the street? You're lucky I don't peel you off this pavement and take you downtown right now. Then do it, Tiana shouted back, surprising herself. The adrenaline was coursing through her veins, drowning out the common sense that told her to stay quiet. If I did something wrong, arrest me. But you haven't found anything. Because there's nothing to find? Davidson laughed, a dry, humorless sound. I don't need to find anything. Your attitude is enough. Disorderly conduct. Resisting arrest. Threatening an officer. That's 3 charges right there, sweetheart. I didn't threaten you. You're yelling in my face, Davidson argued. That's a threat. He grabbed her arm again, twisting it harder. Tiana gasped, her knees buckling slightly. The pain was blinding. She felt like her shoulder was about to pop out of its socket. Get off her. A boy in the crowd yelled. He stepped forward, throwing a soda can onto the ground. It bounced off the pavement and rolled toward the police car. Davidson turned his head toward the crowd, his hand moving instinctively toward the pepper spray on his belt. Back off, he shouted. Everyone, get back, or I'm spraying this whole sidewalk. The crowd flinched. They knew he wasn't bluffing. They had seen it happen before. The students took a step back, creating a wider circle, but they didn't leave. They were angrier now, their phones held high like shields. They weren't going to let him disappear with Tiana without a fight. Davidson turned his attention back to the girl. He was frustrated now. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. This was supposed to be a quick stop, a scare tactic, maybe a pat down, and then he would drive away feeling powerful. Instead, he was the star of a viral video in the making. He needed to wrap this up. He needed to get her in the car and drive away before a supervisor showed up. Get in the car, he commanded, opening the back door of the cruiser. Now Tiana looked at the dark plastic seat inside. It looked like a cage. A wave of hopelessness washed over her. If she got in that car, if she disappeared behind that metal mesh divider, she wasn't sure she would be okay. Anything could happen in there. She froze. Her feet felt like they were made of lead. I said get in, Davidson roared. He put both hands on her shoulders and prepared to shove her head down to force her into the vehicle. Just then, a man in a suit came running down the school steps. It was Mr. Henderson, the history teacher. He was out of breath and his tie was loose, but he looked furious. Henderson yelled, waving his arms. Officer, stop. That's a student. She's one of mine. Davidson ignored him. He didn't care about teachers. In his mind, they were part of the problem, coddling these kids and filling their heads with rights and rules. He kept pushing Tiana toward the seat. You need to listen to me, Henderson yelled, getting closer. He was smart enough not to touch the officer, but he stood right next to the scene. This is ridiculous. She hasn't done anything. We have a test in 10 minutes. She's under arrest, Davidson said, without looking at him. Back away, sir, or you'll be joining her. For what? Henderson demanded. For walking to school? For resisting? Davidson spat. He finally managed to force Tiana into the back seat. She fell onto the hard plastic, her face pressed against the scratchy upholstery. She tried to sit up, but Davidson slammed the door shut. The sound of the door closing was final. It was heavy and loud, like a tombstone dropping. The sudden silence from outside was muffled by the glass. Tiana sat up, her heart pounding so hard she thought it would bruise her ribs. She looked out the window. The faces of her peers were distorted through the glass. She saw Mr. Henderson arguing with Davidson, waving his hands. She saw the cops looking around, his chest heaving. She was trapped. She pulled at the handle, but of course it didn't open. There were no handles in the back of a police car. She looked at the mesh partition that separated her from the front seat. It was dirty, with fingerprints and smudges all over it. The air in the car smelled stale, like old sweat and cigarette smoke. Tiana hugged her knees to her chest, the handcuffs still digging into her wrists. She looked out at her art supplies, still scattered on the hood of the car. The wind was picking up, threatening to blow her loose papers away. No one was picking them up. Everyone was focused on the yelling. She felt small. She felt powerless. She thought about her mother. Her mom was at work, probably in a meeting. She wouldn't know where Tiana was. She would call her phone, and Tiana wouldn't answer because they would take her phone away. How long would it take for her mom to realize something was wrong? An hour? 2 hours? By then, Tiana could be in a cell downtown. She had seen movies and shows. She knew how the system worked. Once you were in, it was hard to get out. They would book her, take her picture, take her fingerprints. It would be a permanent record. And for what? Because she was walking fast? Because she was wearing a hoodie? Tiana wiped her eyes with her sleeve, leaving a smudge of charcoal on her face. She felt the anger rising up again, mixing with the fear. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. Why did he get to do this? Why did he get to ruin her day just because he could? Outside, Davidson was walking back to the driver's door. He was arguing with Mr. Henderson, pointing a finger in his chest. "You're interfering with a police investigation," Davidson was saying. "You want to go to jail too? I want you to do your job properly." Henderson shouted back, "You're harassing a child. She's a suspect." Davidson yelled. He turned his back on the teacher and reached for the door handle. Tiana watched him coming. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying for a miracle. She prayed for a teacher to stop him, for a principal to come out, for another cop to drive by and tell him he was crazy. But deep down, she knew that none of that was likely to happen. People were scared of guys like Davidson. They were scared of the badge and the gun. Davidson pulled the door open and sat in the driver's seat. The car rocked under his weight. He didn't look back at Tiana. He just started typing on his computer, the keys clicking loudly. He was ignoring her, treating her like she was cargo. Tiana took a shaky breath. She looked out the windshield. The street was busy. Cars were driving by, people going to work, living their lives. They had no idea what was happening in this parked car. No idea that a girl's future was being crushed by a man on a power trip. Davidson put the car in gear. "You're going to regret being smart with me," he muttered, mostly to himself. He checked his mirror and prepared to pull away from the curb. But then, a set of tires screeched loudly right in front of the police car. Davidson slammed on the brakes, jerking them both forward. A black SUV had swerved in, cutting off the patrol car, blocking it from leaving the curb. It was parked diagonally, aggressive and sudden. "What the hell?" Davidson yelled, slamming his hand on the steering wheel. "Are you kidding me?" He looked up, ready to scream at the driver. But before he could say a word, the driver's door of the SUV flew open. The driver of the black SUV didn't just step out. She erupted from the vehicle like a force of nature. The car door was thrown open with such violence that it rattled on its hinges. A woman in a sharp navy blue suit stepped onto the asphalt, her heels clicking with a sharp rhythmic authority that cut through the chaos of the street. She didn't look like a parent rushing to pick up a child. She looked like someone who managed crises for a living. She was currently facing the biggest one of her day. Inside the police cruiser, Officer Davidson let out a frustrated groan. He leaned on his horn, a long, aggressive blast that was meant to scare the driver into moving. "Move your car," he shouted through the closed glass, his face turning red. "I'm on police business." The woman didn't even flinch at the noise. She slammed her own door shut, checked her reflection in the tinted window for a split second, and then marched straight toward the driver's side of the patrol car. She was holding a leather briefcase and a phone, which she was still speaking into as she walked. "I don't care what the schedule says." "Clear my afternoon," she said into the phone, her voice clipped and icy. "Something has come up at the high school." "No, not a meeting. An emergency?" She ended the call and shoved the phone into her pocket. Davidson rolled down his window, ready to tear into this woman for obstructing an officer. He was already annoyed by the crowd, annoyed by the teacher. And now this suburban mom in her fancy SUV thought she could block him in? "Lady, are you crazy?" Davidson barked, sticking his head out the window. "Get back in your vehicle and move this car right now, or I'm writing you a ticket for obstructing traffic." The woman stopped right at his window. She didn't smile. She didn't look intimidated. She just looked down at him with eyes that were suddenly very cold and very hard. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a badge wallet. She flipped it open and held it inches from his nose. "Officer," she said, her voice dropping an octave, filled with a dangerous calm, "I suggest you take your hands off the steering wheel and listen to me very carefully." Davidson squinted at the badge. It wasn't a police badge. It was gold, heavy, and engraved with the seal of the city. He read the text underneath, "Mayor's Office." Then he looked at the ID card in the plastic sleeve next to it. The face in the photo matched the woman standing in front of him. The name read, Mayor Elaine Jennings. The blood instantly drained from Davidson's face. His mouth went dry. He knew the name. Everyone in the city knew the name. Elaine Jennings had just been sworn in a month ago. She had run on a platform of cleaning up the streets and reforming the police department. She was on the news every night. And here she was, standing on the curb screaming at him. "Mayor Jennings?" Davidson stammered, his voice suddenly weak. "I didn't realize." "Obviously you didn't," she snapped. She ignored his stuttering and leaned down, bringing her face level with his. "Why is there a child in the back of your car? Why are there books scattered all over the pavement? And why did I hear screams from across the street?" Davidson's brain was scrambling. He tried to come up with a lie, a story that made sense. It's a police matter, ma'am. An arrest." She was resisting. "She is 17 years old," Elaine cut him off, her voice rising so that the crowd could hear. "She is a student at this school. She weighs 100 pounds soaking wet, and you are telling me she was resisting you so much that you had to throw her in a cage?" She fit the description of a suspect, Davidson tried to explain, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. "There was a theft nearby. I was just doing my job." "Your job?" Elaine laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was sharp and incredulous. "Your job is to protect these children, not terrorize them. I saw the art supplies on your hood, officer. I saw the charcoal drawings. Since when is art evidence of theft?" Inside the back seat, Tiana was frozen. She had been watching the scene unfold through the wire mesh, unable to hear the words clearly, but she saw the woman's face. She saw the authority in her stance, and then it hit her. She knew that profile. She knew that hair. She knew that voice. "Mom," Tiana whispered. The sound was tiny, muffled by the glass in the distance, but Elaine heard it. Or maybe she just felt it. She turned away from Davidson's terrified face and looked through the windshield into the back seat. Her eyes locked onto Tiana's tear-stained face. She saw the charcoal smudge on her daughter's cheek. She saw the handcuffs. She saw the terror in her eyes. Something inside Elaine snapped. It was one thing to hear about police brutality on the news. It was another thing to see a random kid being harassed. But this was her baby. This was the girl she had raised to be respectful, to work hard, to follow the rules. This was the girl who Elaine had dropped off at the curb just a few days ago with a wave and a smile. "Davidson," Elaine said, turning back to the officer slowly. She didn't shout anymore. Her voice was terrifyingly quiet. "Unlock that door now, ma'am. Protocol says I can't release a prisoner until unlock the door." Elaine screamed, slamming her hand on the roof of the car. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Do not make me say it again. If you do not open that door in 3 seconds, I will call the chief of police, I will call the district attorney, and I will have your badge on the ground before you can blink. Do you understand me?" Davidson looked at the mayor. Then he looked at the 50 students holding up phones. Then he looked at Mr. Henderson, the teacher, who was now standing right behind the mayor with his arms crossed. Davidson knew he was beaten. Not just beaten, destroyed. He had messed up in the worst way possible. He had harassed a civilian, embarrassed the department, and accidentally kidnapped the mayor's daughter. With trembling fingers, he reached for the control panel on his door. He fumbled with the button for the back door lock. There was a loud click. Elaine didn't wait for an invitation. She marched to the back door, yanked it open, and reached inside. Tiana didn't know whether to cry or hug her. She just sat there, stunned. "Are you hurt?" Elaine asked, her voice softening instantly as she touched Tiana's face. "Did he hurt you?" "My wrist," Tiana whispered. "And he ruined my drawings." Elaine looked down at the handcuffs. "Get these off," she commanded Davidson, who was still sitting in the driver's seat looking like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. Davidson scrambled out of the car. He moved to the back door, his hands shaking so badly he could barely fit the key in the lock. The crowd jeered at him as he fumbled. "Look at him now," someone yelled. Asterisk, not so tough as he. Asterisk, finally, the cuffs clicked open. Tiana pulled her arms free, rubbing her sore wrists. Elaine helped her out of the car. As soon as Tiana's feet hit the pavement, the crowd erupted into cheers. It wasn't just a few kids clapping. It was a roar of approval. It was the sound of people seeing justice happen in real time. Elaine wrapped her arm around Tiana's shoulder, holding her tight. She glared at Davidson, who was standing there with his head down, holding the handcuffs. "Don't say a word," Elaine warned him as he opened his mouth to apologize. "Don't you dare apologize to me. You will have plenty of time to explain yourself to the Internal Affairs Board. You can consider yourself suspended, effective immediately." "Ma'am, please. I didn't know." Davidson started to beg. "That is the problem," Elaine shouted, pointing a finger in his face. "You didn't know? You didn't care? You saw a black child in a hoodie, and you saw a criminal. You didn't see a human being. You didn't see a student, and you certainly didn't see the mayor's daughter." She took a step closer, forcing him to step back. "If you can do this to her, imagine what you've done to kids who don't have a mother who can pull up in an SUV and stop traffic. This ends today. Your career is over." Davidson looked at the ground, his face burning with shame. The cameras were rolling, capturing his fall from grace. The power dynamic had flipped completely in less than 5 minutes. He was no longer the hunter. He was the prey. Tiana leaned into her mother, finally letting the tears fall freely. She was safe. The nightmare was over. But as she looked at the crowd, and at the police car, and at her ruined sketchbook lying on the hood, she realized that this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about everyone else. Her mother wasn't just saving Tiana. She was saving everyone else from ever having to go through this morning again. The silence that fell over the scene was heavy, but it wasn't the same tense silence from before. This was the silence of a man realizing his world had just collapsed. Officer Davidson stood by the open back door of his patrol car, looking defeated. His shoulders slumped forward, and the arrogance that had defined his morning had completely evaporated. He looked smaller now, less like a powerful figure of authority and more like a tired man in a costume that didn't fit him anymore. Elaine. Jennings didn't wait for him to speak again. She turned her back on him, effectively dismissing him as if he were nothing more than a nuisance. The crowd of students watched her every move, their phones still recording, capturing the moment the tables turned. They had expected a shouting match, or maybe a scolding, but they hadn't expected the sheer, icy authority that radiated from the mayor. "Come here," Elaine said softly to her daughter, pulling Tiana into a tight hug. It wasn't a hug for show. It was the kind of desperate embrace only a mother can give after realizing how close she came to losing something precious. Tiana buried her face in her mother's shoulder, smelling the familiar scent of her perfume, which smelled like vanilla and home. For the first time that morning, Tiana felt safe. "I'm sorry," Tiana whispered, her voice muffled against the fabric of her mother's suit. "I didn't do anything, Mom. I swear." "I know," Elaine replied, stroking Tiana's hair gently. "I saw everything. I saw the drawings. I saw him throw you against the car. You have nothing to apologize for." "Nothing," Elaine pulled back, but kept her hands on Tiana's shoulders, looking her in the eyes to make sure she was really okay. She reached down and gently took Tiana's wrists, inspecting the red marks left by the handcuffs. Her jaw tightened when she saw the abrasions, but she didn't explode again. She channeled her anger into a calm, focused determination. Mr. Henderson, the history teacher, walked over slowly. He looked relieved, but also a little awestruck. Mayor Jennings, he said, nodding respectfully. I tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen. He was going to take her in. He was booking her for resisting arrest just because she asked him not to ruin her art. Elaine nodded at him, her expression appreciative. Thank you, Mr. Henderson. Thank you for stepping up when no one else would. It means more to me than I can say that you tried to protect her. We protect our own, Henderson said simply. He looked at Tiana and smiled. You okay, T? You missed the bell, but I think I can mark you present. Tiana managed a weak, tearful smile. Thanks, Mr. Henderson. Elaine turned her attention back to the mess on the hood of the police car. The wind had picked up, threatening to blow the charcoal drawings away. The ruined portrait of the old man was pinned under the empty water bottle, the paper soaking up the water. It was a tragic sight, symbol of the carelessness with which Davidson had treated Tiana's property. She walked over to the car. Davidson flinched as she reached past him, but she wasn't reaching for him. She carefully gathered the wet drawings, shaking off the excess water. Tiana, she called out, help me with your bag. Tiana walked over and opened her backpack. Elaine slid the damaged artwork inside, handling it with reverence, as if it were a priceless document rather than a student's homework. She picked up the textbooks in the binder, dusting them off. He threw your things everywhere, Elaine said, her voice low, but carrying a sharp edge. He thought this was trash. It was just to scare me, Tiana said, closing her bag. He wanted to show me he could do whatever he wanted. Elaine zipped the bag shut and handed it to her daughter. Then she turned to face Davidson one last time. He was still standing there, looking at the ground, probably praying for the earth to open up and swallow him. Officer, Elaine said. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the quiet of the morning, it carried perfectly. You are going to stay right here. Do not leave. The chief of police is on his way. He is less than 2 minutes out, and I expect a full report on his desk regarding your conduct today. Davidson nodded slowly, unable to meet her eyes. Yes, Mayor. No, Elaine corrected him. You don't call me Mayor. You call me Ma'am, like you should have taught my daughter to do when you were harassing her. But more importantly, you need to understand what happens next. This isn't just a complaint that will go away. You assaulted a minor without probable cause. You damaged her property. You abused your power. And you did it in front of 50 witnesses. She gestured to the students around them. Do you see all these phones? Do you see the cameras? This is going to be on the news by noon. Everyone in this city is going to know exactly who you are and what you did here today. I'm going to make sure of it. Davidson finally looked up, panic flashing in his eyes. Please. I have a family. I have 20 years on the force. You just threw all of that away in 5 minutes, Elaine said. Her tone was final. That is not my fault. That is yours. You had a choice to be a peace officer, and you chose to be a bully. Now you have to live with that. A siren wailed in the distance, getting closer quickly. It wasn't the aggressive wail of a patrol car in pursuit. It was the steady, rhythmic wail of a superior officer responding to a scene. The chief of police was arriving. Elaine checked her watch and then turned to Tiana. Put your bag on your shoulder. We are leaving. Shouldn't we wait for the chief? Tiana asked. To make a statement? You can make a statement later with a lawyer present when you are calm and safe, Elaine said. Right now, I am getting you out of here. You have had enough trauma for one morning. You are not going to stand here on a sidewalk and answer questions for the police. You are going home. She guided Tiana toward the black SUV. The crowd of students parted like the Red Sea to let them through. As they walked, the students began to clap again. It started as a slow clap, then grew faster and louder. Some kids were shouting, "Thank you," and others were chanting Tiana's name. It was a moment of vindication. Tiana felt a lump in her throat. She didn't feel like a hero. She just felt exhausted. But the support of her classmates gave her a warm feeling that pushed back the cold fear she had felt earlier. They reached the SUV. Elaine opened the passenger. Dora and Tiana climbed in. Sinking into the soft leather seat, it felt luxurious compared to the hard plastic of the police car. Elaine closed the door and walked around to the driver's side. Before she got in, she looked back at the school steps one last time. She looked at Mr. Henderson, who gave her a thumbs up. She looked at the scattered students, who were now surrounding Davidson, making sure he didn't try to leave or destroy any evidence. Then, a marked police car with flashing lights screeched around the corner and skidded to a halt behind Davidson's cruiser. A tall man in a white uniform shirt jumped out, looking frantic. It was the chief. He saw Davidson, he saw the crowd, and he saw the mayor's SUV pulling away from the curb. He didn't need to ask what happened. The look on Davidson's face told the whole story. Elaine got into the driver's seat and closed the door, shutting out the noise. The inside of the car was peaceful and quiet. She started the engine and checked her mirrors. She looked over at Tiana, who was staring blankly out the window. "Are you hungry?" Elaine asked, her voice gentle again. "We can go get breakfast." "We can get anything you want." Tiana turned to look at her mother. The adrenaline was finally wearing off, leaving her feeling shaky and hollow. "I just want to go home," she said. "I want to wash my face. I want to fix my drawing." Elaine reached over and squeezed Tiana's hand. "We can do that. We can do all of that." She pulled the SUV away from the curb and drove down the street, leaving the flashing lights and the drama behind them. As they drove, Tiana looked in the side mirror. The scene of the crime was getting smaller and smaller. She saw the chief of police yelling at Davidson, waving his arms. She saw Mr. Henderson gathering her pencils from the ground. She saw her classmates standing together, talking in excited groups. It had been the worst morning of her life. She had been humiliated, handcuffed, and terrified. But as she watched the police car disappear in the distance, she realized something important. The man who had tried to ruin her day was the one in trouble now. He had underestimated her. He had thought she was just a kid he could push around. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know who her mother was. He had picked the wrong fight. Tiana took a deep breath and let it out slowly. She turned away from the window and looked at her mom. "Mom?" "Yes, baby. He's not going to be a cop anymore, is he?" Elaine gripped the steering wheel tightly. "No, Tiana, he's not." "Good," Tiana said simply. She leaned her head back against the headrest and closed her eyes. "Good." The city passed by outside the window, but for the first time that day, Tiana didn't feel scared of it. She knew it wasn't perfect. She knew there were other officers like Davidson out there. But she also knew that there were people like her mother, and people like Mr. Henderson, and people like her friends who stood up for what was right. And for right now, that was enough.